Growing up, my life felt like a storm that never passed. At just 10 years old, I was thrust into the chaos of a broken family when my parents' marriage shattered in the most dramatic and painful way imaginable. The root of their divorce? A toxic mix of betrayal, suspicion, and heart-wrenching accusations. My father, consumed by rage and distrust, accused my mother of infidelity, a claim that tore our household apart. But it didn't stop there. He went as far as to question whether my younger sister, only 5 at the time, was even his biological child. Can you imagine what that did to us? To her? These allegations hung over our heads like a dark cloud, poisoning every memory we had of happier times. Even now, decades later, the truth remains murky, buried under layers of bitterness and silence. The aftermath of a divorce was nothing short of devastating. My father walked out, leaving behind not just an empty chair at the dinner table, but also a gaping void in our lives. Yet, he wasn't entirely gone. He became this distant figure who occasionally reappeared, paying for my school fees or bringing gifts, all while remaining emotionally detached. Strangely enough, he chose to invest in my future, covering my education and supporting me financially, but completely abandoned my sister. No child support, no acknowledgement, nothing. It's almost as if his suspicions about her parentage made her invisible to him. Meanwhile, my mother, left to pick up the pieces, struggled to make ends meet working long hours as a cashier. She kept the crumbling house we lived in, a constant reminder of everything we'd lost, but it offered little shelter from the emotional turmoil brewing inside its walls. This fractured dynamic set the stage for years of tension, resentment, and secrets that would haunt us all well into adulthood. The loss of my father last year was a devastating blow, one that left an unfillable void in my life. He had been my anchor through the chaos of childhood, the one person who truly believed in me despite the fractured dynamics of our family. After his divorce from my mother, he remarried years later, but fate, or perhaps something deeper, denied him any more children in that union. It wasn't just bad luck. It felt like a cruel twist of destiny. My stepmother and I never grew particularly close, but she respected the bond my father and I shared. To him, I was his only daughter, a phrase he repeated often enough for me to feel its weight. And when cancer finally claimed him, leaving behind a $400,000 trust fund solely in my name, it was both a blessing and a curse, a bittersweet inheritance wrapped in layers of resentment. You see, my father's love for me was as undeniable as it was polarizing. While he doted on me, ensuring I had access to better education and opportunities than my sister ever did, this favoritism bred bitterness within our household. My mother never contested his refusal to support my sister financially after the divorce, but her silence only fueled the growing tension between us. Now, with his passing, the old wounds reopened with alarming intensity. The moment news of the inheritance reached my mother and sister, their thinly veiled disdain transformed into outright hostility. They couldn't comprehend why the so-called golden child, was chosen over them. Wasn't blood thicker than water? Or was my father's belief that my sister wasn't his own still haunting us, even in death? To make matters worse, my mother began distancing herself emotionally, retreating into a coldness I hadn't seen since my teenage years. She barely acknowledged my grief during the funeral, consumed instead by her fury at being excluded from the will. Meanwhile, my sister, once indifferent, now looked at me with eyes full of envy and accusation. Their reactions stung deeply, not because I craved their approval, but because it confirmed what I'd always feared. In their eyes, I wasn't family. I was merely a vessel for my father's legacy, a reminder of everything they believed they deserved but would never receive. The financial exploitation from my mother and sister wasn't something that began overnight. It had been a slow, insidious process creeping into my life like ivy overtaking a crumbling wall. From the moment I started earning my own money, they found ways to weave themselves into my finances, always with some excuse or another. At first, it seemed harmless enough, small loans here and there for emergencies that were never quite explained. But as time went on, their demands grew bolder, more frequent, until it became clear this wasn't about fleeting needs. It was a pattern of dependency masked by familial obligation. Living in Ohio while they remained in Houston should have created distance, both physical and emotional. Instead, it only made their tactics sharper, more calculated. They knew I couldn't easily verify their claims, so every story they spun felt just plausible enough to tug at my sense of duty. It's not that they were cruel or overtly manipulative, at least not at first. Their approach was subtler, cloaked in guilt and thinly veiled appeals to family loyalty. My mother would call once a month, her voice trembling as she described yet another crisis. Car repairs, medical bills, unexpected taxes. Each time, she assured me the money would be repaid, though those promises dissolved like smoke in the wind. And then there was my sister, who rarely spoke to me directly, but whose presence loomed large through my mother's requests. She needed help paying off debts, funding vacations, even covering rent during tough months. The irony stung here I was, working tirelessly to provide for my own family, yet constantly expected to prop up theirs. What made it worse was how they justified it all. To them, I wasn't just a daughter or a sister, I was a lifeline, and a team disguised as kinship. They acted as if my father's trust fund and my stable income somehow obligated me to fill the void he left behind. Yet, no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. Every dollar I sent seemed to fuel their expectations rather than alleviate their struggles. Even now, sitting hundreds of miles away, I can feel the weight of their entitlement pressing down on me, a relentless reminder that, to them, I am less of a person and more of a resource. The moment my mother asked me for $100,000 to renovate the crumbling house in Houston, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. The request wasn't just outrageous, it was suffocating. She painted a vivid picture of their dire situation: walls crumbling, ceilings sagging, wiring so old it could spark a fire during storms. It all sounded alarmingly plausible, but something about her tone made me uneasy. This wasn't the first time she'd come to me with tales of hardship, and over the years, I'd grown wary of how much truth lay beneath her words. Still, guilt gnawed at me. How could I ignore the place where I grew up, the house that sheltered us through some of our darkest days? But then again, how could I trust her when every dollar I gave seemed to vanish into thin air? When I told her there was no way I could lend her $100,000, she quickly backtracked, settling on $50,000 instead, as if that amount somehow made this transaction more reasonable. My husband, ever the voice of caution, insisted we handle this carefully. He suggested transferring the money in installments, monitoring how it was used before sending more. It was a smart plan, one I clung to as I activated an old bank account in Houston and deposited $110,000, just enough to cover the agreed amount while keeping a buffer. I gave my mother access to the account, brushing off her questions about why I didn't transfer the funds directly to hers. "It's safer this way," I lied, masking my growing unease. As the first installment left the account, a wave of dread washed over me. What if this was another scheme? What if they weren't planning to repair the house at all? Every text from my mother felt heavier than the last, each message a reminder of the fragile line between obligation and exploitation. Yet, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. Little did I know, the betrayal awaiting me would cut deeper than anything I'd imagined. The truth about my sister's wedding hit me like a freight train, shattering any lingering trust I had in my mother and her. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity of their deception. 2 months into transferring money for the so-called house renovation, I began to notice cracks in their story. My suspicions deepened when a school friend casually mentioned that my sister was planning a lavish wedding. The kicker? She hadn't told me a word about it. Instead, my family had been siphoning off the funds meant for home repairs to fund what they called a fairy tale event, a grand spectacle with over 100 guests, top-tier catering, and extravagant decorations. When I confronted my aunt, who lived nearby, the details confirmed my worst fears. Not only was the house already renovated, gleaming with fresh paint and polished floors, but my sister's engagement party had taken place right on its newly decorated lawn. Wine flowed freely, laughter echoed through the air, and yet not once did anyone think to include me. No invitation, no phone call, nothing. How could they celebrate such a monumental occasion without even acknowledging my existence? The realization left me reeling, as if I'd been punched in the gut. What stung most wasn't just the exclusion. It was the hypocrisy. They claimed poverty while bleeding me dry, all to pull off a wedding I wasn't deemed worthy enough to attend. Every dollar I sent under the guise of repairing crumbling walls had instead gone toward funding their opulence. And my sister, the same woman who barely spoke to me unless she needed something, was now living out her dream day, surrounded by strangers and acquaintances, while I remained an afterthought. When I checked the bank account, it was empty, drained to finance her fantasy. That moment, staring at the zero balance, felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, watching everything I believed about my family crumble beneath me. The moment I stopped transferring money into the account, a suffocating tension settled over my life. It wasn't just about cutting them off financially, it felt like severing a toxic umbilical cord that had tethered me to their manipulations for years. My mother and sister bombarded me with calls and texts, but I refused to respond. For once, I chose silence over compliance, steeling myself against their pleas and accusations. But they weren't done fighting. When my husband answered one of my mom's desperate calls, a move I explicitly forbade, I felt the fragile calm I'd built shatter around me. He spilled everything, the lies about the house repairs, the knee transplant scam, even the truth about how every penny was funneled straight into my sister's extravagant wedding plans. At first, I wanted to scream at him for betraying my strategy. I'd hoped to make them squirm, to let guilt eat away at them before revealing that I knew the truth. But instead, he laid it all bare in one fell swoop. To my astonishment, my mom didn't deny any of it. After days of relentless harassment, she finally broke down on the phone, her voice trembling not with remorse, but desperation. She admitted it all. The renovation story was fabricated, the knee surgery non-existent, and yes, the $50,000 meant for repairs had been siphoned off to fund my sister's fairy tale wedding. Yet, even as she confessed, her tone carried an unsettling edge of entitlement. "We didn't think you'd find out," she said, almost defensively, as if my discovery was the real crime here. And then came the kicker, the audacity that left me reeling. Despite her admission, she still demanded more money. "Please send the rest so we can finish the wedding," she pleaded, as though nothing had changed. Her words hit me like a slap across the face. How could she expect me to keep enabling this charade? The betrayal cut deeper than ever, not because of the lies themselves, but because of her unshakable belief that I owed them something, anything to salvage their grand illusion. The fallout from my decision to cut them off was swift and brutal, like a storm that tears through a fragile village. My sister's dream wedding, the very event they had schemed and lied for, crumbled before their eyes, leaving behind nothing but humiliation and blame. Without the remaining funds I refused to send, there wasn't enough money to cover the extravagant plans they'd set in motion. The venue remained half-decorated, the food underwhelming, and the guest list riddled with whispers of disappointment. It was as if the entire day mirrored the hollowness of their intentions. All show, no substance. My friend later told me how my sister lashed out at her husband, accusing him of ruining everything, while my mother begged him not to reveal the truth about their financial mismanagement. They clung to their pride even as it slipped through their fingers, refusing to take responsibility for the chaos they had created. And then came the voicemail that shattered whatever lingering hope I had of reconciliation. "I'm ashamed of you," my mother's voice hissed, cold and unyielding. "Don't ever call me Mom again or step foot near me." Her words hit me like daggers, piercing deeper than any insult she'd thrown my way before. For hours I sat alone in my room, crying until my throat burned and my chest felt hollow. How could the woman who gave birth to me disown me so easily? Yet, beneath the anguish, a strange sense of relief began to surface, a quiet acknowledgement that this toxic chapter of my life was finally over. For years, I'd been trapped in a cycle of guilt and obligation, pouring money into a bottomless pit of lies. Now, free from their manipulation, I could breathe again. But freedom came at a cost. The pain of being erased by my own mother lingered like an open wound, reminding me of the cruel irony. I had sacrificed so much for a family but never truly saw me as one of their own. Just when I thought my life couldn't spiral any further into chaos, my husband dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. It was supposed to be an ordinary evening, a rare family dinner with my sister and her husband after years of strained relations. We drank more than we should have, laughter filling the room as old memories resurfaced. My sister, glowing in a form-fitting red dress, seemed like a different person altogether. She had lost weight, worked tirelessly on her appearance, and for once, she commanded attention without trying. Even my husband complimented her, his gaze lingering just a second too long. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Later that night, after our guests left, the mood shifted. The wine flowed freely between us, loosening tongues and unraveling truths better left buried. As we lay together, still basking in the warmth of intimacy, he said it words so sharp they cut through my drunken haze like shards of glass. "I'm so desperately in love with your sister." His voice was soft, almost dreamy, as though confessing a secret he carried for years. For a moment, I thought I misheard him. But no, the look in his eyes confirmed it. He wasn't joking. He meant every word. My heart sank, each beat echoing painfully in my chest. How could this happen? My own husband, the man I trusted above all else, admitting his love for the very sister who had betrayed me time and again. Was this some cruel cosmic joke? Panic surged within me, mingling with anger and disbelief. Had their bond always been deeper than I realized? All those late-night calls, the easy banter, the way he lit up whenever she visited, it all made sense now, twisted into something sinister. When morning came, clarity hit harder than the hangover. Every memory from the previous night replayed in vivid detail, taunting me. Did he act on his feelings? Were they complicit in this betrayal? My mind raced with questions, none of which I dared ask aloud, not yet. Instead, I sat silently, watching him move about the kitchen, acting as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Trust, fragile as glass, now lay shattered at my feet. This harrowing journey has taught me lessons I wish I'd learned sooner, lessons about boundaries, honesty, and the courage to confront painful truths head-on. For years, I allowed myself to be tethered to my mother and sister's endless demands, mistaking their exploitation for familial obligation. I told myself it was noble to help them, even as they drained me emotionally and financially. But what I failed to realize was that by avoiding confrontation, by refusing to set firm limits, I was enabling their toxic behavior. The moment I froze that bank account and cut them off felt like severing a limb. It was excruciating but necessary. Only then did I see how deeply entrenched their manipulation had become, how they viewed me not as family, but as a resource to exploit. If I could go back, I would have drawn those boundaries long ago, sparing myself years of resentment and heartache. The betrayal didn't stop there. My marriage now teeters on the edge of an abyss because of secrets left unspoken. My husband's drunken confession shattered something inside me, a fragile trust I didn't know could break so easily. His words weren't just careless musings. They were a reflection of emotions he'd buried deep within, emotions I should have addressed before they festered into something unbearable. This ordeal has forced me to confront a brutal truth. Silence is not kindness, it's complicity. By ignoring the signs, by brushing off uneasy feelings, I let both my family and my marriage spiral into chaos. What I've come to understand is this: life doesn't reward avoidance. Whether it's standing up to a manipulative mother or demanding transparency from a spouse, facing problems directly is the only way to reclaim control. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's self-preservation. And communication isn't weakness, it's strength. These realizations may have come too late to salvage some relationships, but they've given me clarity moving forward. No more will I sacrifice my peace for people who see me as nothing more than a means to an end.